A millionaire man locked his daughter in a basement for 15 years, making everyone believe she was dead. Then, on the day of his son's wedding, the young woman appeared before everyone, revealing a family secret so dark that her father tried to flee before being discovered. Elena Valdez, a lively 10-year-old girl, was excitedly jumping as her father, Javier Valdez, loaded suitcases into their luxurious car. "Hurry up, Dad! I want to get to the beach!" she shouted, her ponytail bouncing with every jump. Javier smiled, but his eyes remained cold. The car ride was tense and silent, broken only by Elena's occasional bursts of excitement. "How much longer?" she asked for the 100th time. Javier gripped the steering wheel. "Elena, please! We'll be there soon." "But you said that an hour ago," Elena complained. Her mother, Sophia, intervened. "Sweetheart, why don't you play with your tablet for a while?" Elena, although disappointed, agreed. As Elena immersed herself in her game, Javier turned to Sophia. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" Sophia tensed visibly. "Javier, I don't think this is the time or place." "When will the time be right, Sophia?" "When you finally decide your career is more important than your family," Javier retorted. They stopped at a gas station. While Elena was inside picking out an ice cream, Javier made a quick phone call. "Everything is ready," he murmured. A male voice responded, "Yes, sir. The place is prepared as requested. We'll be there in an hour." Javier hung up, his expression unreadable. They continued their journey, the landscape changing, becoming more rural and wooded. "Are you sure we're going the right way, Javier?" Sophia asked, frowning as she looked out the window. "Trust me," Javier replied curtly. "I know a shortcut." Finally, as the sun began to set, Javier stopped the car in front of an isolated cabin. "This is where we're staying?" Sophia asked, confused. "I thought we were going to a beach resort." "Change of plans," Javier stated, turning off the engine. "I thought some private family time would be nice." As Elena explored the area around the cabin, Javier took Sophia aside. "What's going on, Javier?" she whispered, alarmed. "This wasn't the plan." He gripped her arm tightly. "The plan has changed. Elena needs discipline, structure, away from your distractions." "What are you talking about? Let me go. You're hurting me." Sophia tried to pull away. "Everything will be fine. Trust me," Javier murmured. Just then, Elena's scream pierced the air. "Mom! Dad! Come see this!" Her scream gave Javier the opportunity he needed. "Go to her. I'll bring the bags inside." Sophia, pale and trembling, ran towards Elena. Inside the cabin, Javier pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "It's done," he said curtly. "Proceed to the next phase." He hung up and walked slowly up the stairs. Sophia and Elena were looking at a small stream near the cabin. "We can swim here tomorrow?" Elena asked hopefully. Sophia forced a smile. "We'll see, honey. Why don't we go see what the cabin is like inside?" They entered to find Javier standing in the main room, a strange expression on his face. He turned to Elena. "Why don't you go pick out your room? They're upstairs." "Okay." Elena ran up the stairs, excited to explore. As soon as Elena was out of sight, Javier turned to Sophia. "This is for her own good," he said, his voice low and menacing. Before Sophia could respond, another scream came from upstairs. "Elena!" Sophia cried, rushing for the stairs. Javier grabbed her arm, stopping her. "Not so fast. Let me go." Sophia struggled against him. "Elena! Elena! Honey, are you all right?" There was no response. Javier dragged Sophia towards a hidden door in the wall. "I'm sorry, Sophia, but this is necessary." "What have you done? Where is my daughter?" Sophia sobbed. Javier opened the door, revealing a dark passageway. "Elena will be fine, better than fine. Away from your influence." "No!" Sophia screamed as Javier pushed her into the darkness. The door slammed shut, muffling Sophia's screams. Javier stood alone in the room, breathing heavily. He took out his phone and dialed a number. "It's done," he said simply. "Proceed with the next phase." He hung up the phone and slowly climbed the stairs. He found Elena unconscious on the floor of one of the bedrooms, a dark-suited man standing beside her. "Is she?" Javier started. "Only sedated," the man replied. "She'll wake up in a few hours." Javier nodded. Take her. You know what to do. The man lifted Elena carefully and carried her out of the room. Javier followed, his face a mask of determination. Outside, a helicopter waited in a nearby clearing. Javier watched as they loaded Elena onto the helicopter, then turned back towards the cabin. I'm sorry, Princess, he murmured, but this is the only way. The helicopter took off, carrying Elena towards an unknown fate. Javier went back into the cabin, closing the door behind him. In the days that followed, the headlines exploded. Family vacation tragedy. Girl disappears, mother goes mad. Desperate search. Millionaire offers reward for his missing daughter. Authorities declare case cold. Elena Valdez, presumed dead. Meanwhile, Elena woke in a nightmare. She had been taken to a secret basement in her father's mansion. Mom, she called out in the darkness. Dad? Only silence answered. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, then years. Elena screamed herself hoarse, cried until there were no tears left. Javier visited her regularly, always with the same explanation. It's for your own good, Princess. The outside world is dangerous. You're safe here. After the first year, Elena stopped believing him. On her 13th birthday, Javier brought her a cake. Happy birthday, my child, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Elena stared at him, her own eyes empty. When can I leave? Javier sighed. Elena, we've been over this. It's dangerous out there. Liar! Elena screamed, throwing the cake against the wall. You're a monster. I hate you. Javier calmly wiped the frosting from his face. I understand you're angry, but someday you'll understand that this is all for your own good. He left, leaving Elena sobbing on the floor. Years passed. Elena grew up in confinement, her only connection to the outside world her father's visits and the books he brought her. On her 18th birthday, Javier arrived with a special gift. It's time you learned about the family business, he announced, handing her a laptop. Elena took it with trembling hands. Can I use the internet? Javier shook his head. It's a closed network, connected only to our servers, but you'll be able to assist me with work. Elena felt her mind already planning how to hack the system. Months of secret work paid off as she finally managed to access the internet. The world had changed so much. She discovered, with horror, that she had been declared dead years ago. My own death, she murmured, tears streaming down her cheeks. Among the news of her supposed death, she found something else. Persistent rumors, conspiracy theories, suggesting that she was still alive. With renewed determination, Elena began to plan her escape. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to do whatever it took to reclaim her freedom. One night, as she worked on the laptop, she heard a strange noise coming from a ventilation grate. Hello? She whispered, approaching cautiously. A man's voice, barely audible, responded, Who's there? Elena's heart pounded in her chest. For the first time in 15 years, she was hearing a voice that wasn't her father's. My name is Elena, she responded, her voice urgent. Who are you? There was a pause before the voice answered, I'm Carlos. I work maintenance at the mansion. But, Elena Valdez? That's impossible. You're dead. Elena laughed bitterly. That's what everyone believes. But I'm here, locked in this basement, for 15 years. My God, Carlos murmured. The theories were true. You have to get out of there. I've tried everything, Elena said, pressing her forehead against the grate. There's no way out. Maybe I can help, Carlos said. But it will take time. Can you be patient? For the first time in years, Elena felt a flicker of hope. I've waited 15 years, she said, her voice trembling. I can wait a little longer. And so, in the darkness of her prison, Elena found an unexpected ally. The countdown to her freedom had begun. The weeks following her discovery of Carlos were a whirlwind of whispered planning and guarded hope. Every night when the mansion slept, Elena made her way to the ventilation grate to talk with Carlos. Carlos, she whispered one night, have you found out anything more about the security? Carlos's voice came back, muffled but clear. It's complicated, Elena. Your father has this place guarded tighter than Fort Knox. There has to be a way, Elena sighed in frustration. I can't spend another day down here. I know, Carlos replied sympathetically. But one wrong step, and we'll both be in trouble. We need to be careful. One evening, their hushed conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. The door opened, revealing Javier. Elena, who were you talking to? He asked, eyes narrowed suspiciously. Elena kept her face impassive. No one, Father. I was reciting the financial report you asked me to review. Javier studied her for a moment, then slowly nodded. He approached her, placing a hand on her hair in a gesture that used to be affectionate, but now made Elena shudder. You know this is all for your own good, don't you, Princess? Yes, Father, she replied softly, her mind racing. I have exciting news, actually, Javier said, oblivious to his daughter's inner turmoil. Your younger brother, Alejandro, is getting married. Alejandro? Elena's heart skipped a beat. Alejandro, the brother she barely remembered, who probably believed she was dead. That's wonderful, she stammered, fighting to maintain her composure. The wedding is in 6 months, Javier continued. It's a shame you won't be able to attend, but you understand why, right? Elena nodded mechanically, her mind working frantically. A wedding. The entire family gathered together. It could be her only chance. Of course, Father, she replied softly. Safety first. Javier smiled, pleased. That's my smart girl. Get some rest now. We have a lot of work to do tomorrow. As soon as Javier was gone, Elena rushed back to the grate. Carlos, she whispered urgently, did you hear that? Every word, Carlos replied. This could be our chance, Elena finished. We have 6 months to plan my escape, and I know exactly where I need to show up to cause the biggest impact. It's risky, Carlos warned. If something goes wrong, I'll be right back where I started, Elena interrupted. But if it works, I'll finally be free, and my father will pay for what he's done. The next few months were a frenzy of meticulous planning. Carlos provided information on security changes, and Elena memorized every detail she could glean from the mansion's blueprints on her father's computer. One night, a few weeks before the wedding, Elena had a daring idea. Carlos, she whispered, I need you to get me a wedding dress. There was a moment of silence before Carlos responded. A wedding dress? Elena, are you sure about this? Elena smiled in the darkness. Completely sure. If I'm going to make an entrance, it's going to be one nobody forgets. The day of the wedding arrived, a mixture of anticipation and terror for Elena. She listened to the commotion above, picturing the arriving guests, the music, the laughter, everything that had been denied to her for 15 years. It's time, Carlos whispered through the grate. Are you ready? Elena took a deep breath, smoothing the wedding dress Carlos had managed to smuggle in. More than ready, it's now or never. With trembling hands, Elena followed Carlos's instructions for unlocking the door to her prison. Every step through the mansion's corridors was a mix of fear and exhilaration. Finally, she reached the doors leading to the grand ballroom, where the reception was in full swing. She could hear her father's voice delivering a speech. And although my dear Elena is not with us today, I know she would be happy to see her brother so blissfully wed, Javier was saying, his voice thick with false emotion. Elena closed her eyes, gathering her strength. Then, with a determined push, she threw the double doors open. The silence that fell over the room was deafening. Hundreds of faces turned towards her, eyes wide with shock and confusion. Elena stepped forward, her voice clear and strong, echoing in the sudden quiet. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, locking eyes with Javier, who had gone visibly pale. But I believe I have something to say about family happiness. And so, before the stunned elite of society, Elena Valdez, the dead daughter, returned to life, ready to expose the truth that had been buried for 15 long years. What are you doing down there? Elena pressed her ear against the wall, desperate to hear everything. I'm Elena Valdez. I've been locked in here for, I don't know how long. A long silence followed, so long that Elena feared Miguel was gone. Finally, his voice returned, thick with disbelief. Elena Valdez? But you're supposed to be dead. There was a funeral and everything. Elena's heart sank. A funeral? How long ago was that? About 5 years ago, Miguel replied. Elena, what's going on? Who has you locked up in here? Elena took a deep breath, preparing to reveal the truth she'd kept hidden for so long. My father, Javier Valdez. He's kept me prisoner here for years. The silence that followed was deafening. When Miguel spoke again, his voice trembled. This is insane. Why would he do something like that? He says it's for my safety, Elena responded, bitterness lacing her words. But the truth is, he's crazy. Miguel, please, you have to help me get out of here. Her voice broke. You're my only hope. Another long pause stretched between them before Miguel replied, Okay, I'll help you, but we have to be very careful. From that moment, Elena's life changed. She was no longer completely alone. Every night, Miguel returned to the wall, and they talked for hours. He told her about the outside world, about the changes that had occurred in the years she'd been locked away. What about my mother? Elena asked one night, dreading the answer. Miguel hesitated. I'm sorry, Elena. Your mother, she didn't take it well. Losing you, it broke her. She's been in a mental institution for years. Elena choked back a sob. This is all his fault, she whispered. He has to pay for what he's done. He will, Miguel promised. But first, we have to get you out of here. Days turned into weeks as they worked on an escape plan. It wasn't easy. Security at the Valdez mansion was impenetrable. I've been watching the guards' patterns, Miguel informed her one night. There's a shift change at 3 a.m. That might be our chance. Elena felt a surge of hope, even though she knew Miguel couldn't see her. What about the cameras? Working on that, Miguel said. I think I can create a loop in the security system. It'll only last a few minutes, though. It's risky. It's all risky, Elena said, biting her lip. But it's worth a shot. As they planned, Elena and Miguel began to share more about their lives. Elena told him about her childhood, the happy times before everything turned into a nightmare. Miguel spoke of his family, his dreams of studying engineering. When I get out of here, Elena said one night, I'll help you make that dream come true. It's the least I can do after all you're risking for me. Miguel chuckled softly. I'm not doing this for a reward, Elena. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Elena's heart skipped a beat. Miguel, Before she could finish her sentence, the sound of approaching footsteps jolted them back to reality. Quick, you need to go, Elena hissed. The footsteps stopped outside her door. An eternity seemed to pass before it creaked open, revealing Javier. Elena, he said, his voice unusually soft. Who were you talking to? Elena kept her face impassive. No one, Father. I was praying. Javier stared intently, searching her face for any sign of deceit. Praying? I didn't know you were religious. I've had a lot of time to think down here, Elena responded, hoping the tremor in her voice would pass for piety and not fear. Javier nodded slowly. Right. Faith can be a comfort in difficult times. He reached out, stroking her cheek with a tenderness that made Elena's stomach churn. You know this is all for your own good, don't you, Princess? I know, Father, she whispered. Javier smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. That's my girl. Soon you'll understand that this is your place. This is where you're safe. This is where you belong. When Javier finally left, Elena slumped against the wall, heart pounding. That had been close, too close. The following days were tense. Elena and Miguel spoke in hushed whispers, fearful of being overheard. But despite the danger, their plans continued. I've got the electrical plans, Miguel whispered one night. I think I can cause a power outage. It'll give us the cover we need. When? Elena asked, hope flickering in her chest. In 3 days, Miguel replied. During your father's birthday party. Elena's breath caught in her throat. It's his birthday? Yes. All of high society will be here. It will be the perfect chaos for our escape. Elena closed her eyes, picturing the scene. Okay, 3 days it is. The next few days were agonizing. Elena could barely eat or sleep, her mind constantly replaying every detail of the plan. Finally, the night arrived. Elena could hear the music and laughter filtering down from above, a cruel reminder of the life that had been stolen from her. "Are you ready?" Miguel's voice whispered through the wall. Elena took a deep breath. "Ready." "Good. In exactly 3 minutes, I'm cutting the power. You'll have 60 seconds to get out of your cell before the backup generators kick in. You remember the way?" "I remember," Elena confirmed. 3 hallways to the right, then the service stairs to the attic. "Exactly. I'll be waiting for you there. And if something goes wrong—" "Nothing will go wrong," Elena interrupted. "It has to work." Those next 3 minutes were the longest of Elena's life. When the lights finally went out, she moved with a speed born of desperation. Her heart pounded as she navigated the darkened hallways, counting the seconds in her head. 58, 59, 60. Just as she reached the service stairs, the emergency lights flickered on. Elena froze, certain she'd be discovered. But no one came. The sounds of the party continued above, seemingly oblivious to the brief blackout. With renewed determination, Elena took the stairs 2 at a time. When she reached the attic, breathless and shaking, she saw a figure waiting for her in the shadows. "Miguel," she whispered. The figure moved into the light and Elena's heart lurched. It wasn't Miguel, it was Javier. "Hello, princess," he said, his voice as cold as ice. "Going somewhere?" Elena stumbled back, desperately searching for an escape route. "Dad, Silence," Javier hissed, advancing towards her. "You thought you could fool me? Thought I wouldn't notice your little plan?" Tears welled up in Elena's eyes. "Please, Dad, I just want to be free." Javier laughed, a humorless sound that sent chills down her spine. "Free? There is no freedom outside these walls, Elena. The world is a cruel and heartless place. I am your only protection." "You're my jailer!" Elena screamed, desperation giving way to rage. Javier moved with a swiftness that caught Elena off guard. His hand clamped around her throat, slamming her against the wall. "I gave you everything," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "And this is how you repay me?" Elena clawed at his hand, struggling to breathe. Just when she thought she would pass out, there was a thud, and the pressure on her throat disappeared. Javier crumpled to the floor, revealing Miguel standing behind him, clutching a heavy candlestick. "Elena!" Miguel cried, rushing to her side. "Are you okay?" Elena coughed, rubbing her throat. "Miguel, I thought he'd caught you." "He did. In the basement. I barely got away." He pulled her into a tight embrace. Elena glanced at her father's still form. "He's just unconscious," Miguel assured her, "but not for long. We have to go. Now." Hand in hand, they raced through the mansion, their hearts pounding with each hurried step. The music from the party grew louder as they neared the ground floor. "How are we going to get past everyone?" Elena whispered, panic creeping into her voice. Miguel met her gaze, his eyes blazing with determination. "Trust me, I have a plan." He stopped in front of an unmarked door, pulled out a ring of keys, and after a few tries, managed to unlock it. "What is this place?" Elena asked, looking around curiously. "The staff dressing room." Miguel quickly moved towards a wardrobe. "Put this on." He tossed Elena a maid's uniform. "You want me to pretend to be a member of the staff?" she asked incredulously. Miguel nodded, pulling on a waiter's vest. "It's the only way we'll blend in with so many people around." Elena hesitated, but the urgency of the situation spurred her into action. She quickly changed, grateful, for the first time, that years of confinement had kept her figure trim and youthful. "How do I look?" she asked, smoothing down the unfamiliar uniform. Miguel looked at her, a mixture of admiration and sadness in his eyes. "Like you were born to serve champagne." Elena gave a shaky laugh. "I guess it's better than looking like an escaped prisoner." The humor faded as they heard voices approaching in the hallway. "Someone's coming," Miguel whispered, grabbing a tray of hors d'oeuvres. "Play along." The door swung open, revealing 2 security guards. "You!" one of them barked. "What are you doing in here?" Miguel stepped forward, his face a mask of innocence. "Sorry, sir. We were sent to get more canapes. Mr. Valdez insists there's not a shortage." The guard narrowed his eyes, his gaze flitting between Miguel and Elena. "I haven't seen you before." He addressed Elena directly. Elena's heart stuttered, but she forced herself to remain composed. "It's my first day, sir," she replied, lowering her eyes in a gesture of subservience that she hoped was convincing. After a tense moment, the guard finally relented. Fine, but hurry it up. The boss is in a foul mood tonight. As soon as the guards were gone, Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That was close, she murmured. Miguel gave her a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. You did great. Now come on, we've got a party to crash. They stepped out into the main hallway, blending with the flow of staff moving back and forth. Elena felt like every eye was on her, certain that at any moment someone would scream, "Imposter!" But no one seemed to notice them as they entered the grand ballroom. For a moment, Elena stood transfixed. It was like stepping into another world. Bright lights, soft music, the clinking of glasses, and the murmur of elegant conversations. Everything that had been denied to her for years was right there in front of her, so close and yet still untouchable. Elena, Miguel's voice broke through her trance. Keep moving. Don't draw attention to yourself. Elena nodded, forcing herself to circulate among the guests, offering canapes with a strained smile. Every face she saw was a painful reminder of the life that had been stolen from her. And then she heard it, a familiar voice that made her freeze. And although my dear Elena is not with us tonight, I know she would be proud to see how our company has flourished. It was Javier, standing on a small makeshift stage, delivering a speech. Elena felt bile rise in her throat. How dare he use her name? How dare he feign grief for her absence when he was the one responsible for it? Elena? The urgency in Miguel's voice snapped her back to reality. We need to go, now. But Elena couldn't move. Her eyes were locked on Javier, years of rage and pain bubbling to the surface. No, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I can't leave like this. Not after everything he's done. Miguel looked at her with concern. Elena, please, it's too dangerous. But Elena wasn't listening anymore. With a decisiveness she hadn't known she possessed, she began to push her way through the crowd towards the stage. And now, Javier continued, oblivious to the drama about to unfold, I ask you to raise your glasses in a toast to Elena, my beloved daughter, who left us far too soon. Liar! Elena's shout cut through the ballroom, silencing every conversation. Hundreds of eyes turned towards her as she stepped onto the stage. Javier froze, his face draining of color as if he'd seen a ghost, and in a way, he had. Elena? Javier stammered, his composure shattered. But this is impossible. You're dead. That's what you've led everyone to believe, haven't you, Father? Elena finished, her voice trembling with rage. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Elena could see shocked faces, some recognizing her from old photographs, others simply stunned by the scene unfolding before them. Elena, darling, Javier said, regaining some of his composure. I don't know what's going on, but you clearly need help. Let me take you to a doctor. He reached for her arm, but Elena recoiled. Don't touch me, she cried. Don't you dare feign concern now, not after keeping me locked away in your basement for years. The murmuring escalated to a collective gasp. Elena watched as realization and horror dawned on the faces of the partygoers. That's ridiculous, Javier sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. Elena had an accident years ago. Everyone knows that. An accident? Elena laughed bitterly. Is that what you're calling kidnapping your own daughter? Making everyone believe I'm dead while you kept me prisoner under your own roof? Javier frantically looked around for support, but he found only expressions of shock and disgust. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. You're clearly confused. Ill, perhaps. He lunged for her arm again. Don't touch me, Elena screamed. Don't you ever touch me again. At that moment, Miguel appeared beside her, placing himself protectively in front of Elena. It's over, Mr. Valdez, he said firmly. The truth is out. Javier stared at Miguel with a mixture of shock and betrayal. You helped her escape? I did the right thing, Miguel retorted. Something you should have done a long time ago. The ballroom had erupted into chaos. People were shouting, some were crying, and many were already pulling out their phones, no doubt calling the police. Elena felt her legs start to give way, years of repressed emotions, of trauma and fear, finally catching up to her. But before she could fall, she felt Miguel's arms around her, holding her steady. I got you, he whispered. You're safe now. As sirens began to wail in the distance, Elena looked at her father one last time. Javier Valdez, the man who had once been her hero, now seemed small and pathetic, surrounded by security guards who didn't know whether to protect him or arrest him. "It's over, Dad," Elena said, her voice tired but firm. "You can't hurt me anymore." And with those words, Elena let Miguel lead her out of the ballroom, leaving the chaos behind and facing, for the first time in years, a future that was uncertain but free. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she adjusted the wedding dress in front of the makeshift mirror in the small staff room. Her hands trembled, making the task of fastening the tiny pearl buttons down the back nearly impossible. "Let me," Carlos said softly, his nimble fingers completing the task in seconds. Elena turned to look at him, gratitude and fear warring in her eyes. "Carlos, I don't know if I can do this." Carlos took her hands in his gaze steady and reassuring. "You can do this, Elena. You've waited 15 years for this moment. This is your chance to take your life back." Elena nodded, drawing in a deep breath to steady her nerves. "You're right. It's just, what if no one believes me? What if they think I'm crazy?" "They'll believe you," Carlos assured her. "The truth has a way of coming out, no matter how hard some people try to hide it." A knock on the door startled them both. "Who is it?" Carlos asked, his voice tight with tension. "It's me, Maria," a female voice responded. "I brought what you asked for, Carlos." Carlos cautiously opened the door, revealing an older woman in a maid's uniform. Maria hurried inside, closing the door behind her. "Dios mío," she breathed, her eyes widening as she took in Elena's appearance. "It's true. You're the spitting image of your photos as a little girl." Elena shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. You remember me?" Maria asked, tears welling in her eyes. "How could I forget you, child? I was there the day you disappeared. I never believed that accident story, but who listens to a simple maid?" Elena felt a lump form in her throat. I'm sorry. I don't remember much from before." "Don't you apologize, darling," Maria interrupted, stepping forward to cup Elena's face in her wrinkled hands. "The important thing is, you're alive, and today, justice will finally be served." Carlos cleared his throat softly. "Maria, we need to go. Now." "Maria, did you bring what I asked?" "Oh yes, of course," Maria said, pulling a small device from her pocket. "The master key. This will open any door in the mansion." Carlos took it, tucking it away carefully. "Thank you, Maria. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." Maria shook her head. "There's nothing to thank. I'm just doing what I should have done years ago." A distant sound of music reached them, causing Elena to tense visibly. "The ceremony is starting," she murmured. Carlos nodded, his expression turning serious. "It's time. Are you ready?" Elena closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength. When she opened them again, there was a fierce determination in her gaze. "I'm ready." Maria stepped forward, adjusting the veil that covered Elena's hair. "Go. Show them who you really are, child. May God be with you." With one last embrace for Maria, Elena and Carlos slipped out of the staff room. They moved through the mansion's hallways like shadows, avoiding the lingering guests and busy staff. As they approached the grand ballroom, the music and chatter grew louder. Elena could feel her heart pounding so hard she feared everyone could hear it. They stopped at the imposing double doors leading into the ballroom. Elena could hear a man's voice speaking. "And though life has thrown us challenges, today we celebrate the love and the joining of two families." "It's my father," Elena whispered, recognizing Javier Valdez's voice. "He's giving a speech." Carlos squeezed her hand in support. "Ready?" Elena couldn't speak. With a fluid motion, Carlos threw open the doors. The silence that fell over the room was instantaneous and deafening. Hundreds of faces turned towards the entrance, expressions of shock and confusion quickly replacing celebratory smiles. Elena stepped forward, her white dress a stark contrast against the sea of colorful guests. Her eyes locked onto the podium where Javier Valdez stood frozen mid-sentence, his face ashen as if he'd seen a ghost. I'm sorry to interrupt, Elena said, her voice wavering slightly before strengthening. But I believe I have something to say about family happiness. Murmurs erupted throughout the room, spreading like wildfire. Elena could hear snippets of conversation. Who is she? Why is she wearing a wedding dress? Javier seemed to recover from his initial shock, his face quickly cycling through fear, then anger, and finally settling on a mask of false concern. I apologize for the interruption, he said into the microphone, his voice strained. It seems we have an unexpected guest. Security, please. No! Elena shouted, advancing down the center aisle. No more lies, Father. No more secrets. The collective gasp that followed the word father was almost physically palpable. Javier gave a nervous laugh. Miss, you are clearly mistaken. I only have one son, Alejandro, whose wedding we are celebrating today. Elena reached the foot of the small stage, her eyes boring into Javier's. Really, Father? You're going to continue to deny me even now? She turned to the crowd, her voice rising. My name is Elena Valdez. 15 years ago, this man, my own father, kidnapped me and locked me in the basement of this very mansion, making everyone believe I was dead. Chaos erupted in the ballroom. Shouts of disbelief, cries of shock, and horrified exclamations filled the air. Amid the confusion, Elena saw a young man in an elegant groom's suit approach. His face was a mixture of shock and something else, recognition. Elena, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the commotion. Is it really you? Tears welled up in Elena's eyes. Alejandro, she breathed. You've grown so much. Alejandro took a step toward her, his hand outstretched as if he wanted to touch her, but was afraid she might disappear. But we were told you were dead. There was a funeral. It was all a lie? It was all a lie, Elena said, her voice breaking. He kept me prisoner all these years, while you mourned my death. Javier finally found his voice. This is ridiculous, he shouted, descending from the stage. This woman is clearly disturbed. Security, get her out of here immediately. Two security guards began to approach, but stopped short when Alejandro held up a hand. No, he said firmly. I want to hear what she has to say. Javier paled. Son, you can't possibly believe this madness. Your sister died years ago. This woman is an imposter. Elena turned to Alejandro, her eyes pleading. Alejandro, I know it's hard to believe, but it's me. I remember when we were kids, how we used to hide in the attic during storms because you were afraid of thunder. I remember you had a stuffed bunny named Mr. Carrots that you took everywhere. I remember… Enough, Javier interrupted, his voice trembling with rage. I don't know how you obtained that information, but I will not allow you to ruin my son's happiest day with your lies. He lunged for Elena's arm, but she violently pulled away. Don't touch me, she screamed. Don't you ever lay a hand on me again. The silence that followed was deafening. All eyes were fixed on Javier, whose face had drained of all color. He began, but the words seemed to fail him. At that moment, an older woman pushed her way through the crowd. Elena instantly recognized her. Aunt Clara, her mother's sister. Oh my God, Clara gasped, rushing towards Elena with trembling hands. Those eyes, those are my sister's eyes. Elena, my child, it's really you? Tears streamed down Elena's face. Yes, Aunt Clara, it's me. Clara enveloped her in a fierce embrace, sobbing uncontrollably. I knew something wasn't right. I never believed… Oh, Elena. I'm so sorry, Alejandro said, his face crumpled with grief and confusion. Dad, his voice cracked. Is it true? Did you really do this? Javier looked wildly around like a trapped animal. I just wanted to protect her. The world is a dangerous place. You don't understand. You call locking your own daughter in a basement for 15 years protection? Carlos's voice boomed through the room. He had been silent until now, but he stepped forward, his eyes blazing with fury. You call stealing her life, her future, protection. Javier spun around to face Carlos, recognition flickering in his eyes. You're the one who helped her escape, traitor. The only traitor here is you, Carlos retorted. You betrayed your family, your daughter, everyone who trusted you. The murmurs in the crowd had escalated to outraged shouts. Elena could see several guests pulling out their phones, undoubtedly calling the police. Alejandro stepped towards his father, his face a mask of disgust. How could you? All these years. How could you look us in the face, knowing what you had done? Javier reached for his son's shoulder, but Alejandro brutally shrugged him off. Don't touch me, he shouted. I don't want to see you ever again. He turned to Elena, tears in his eyes. I'm so sorry, sister. If I'd only known. Elena took his hand, squeezing it gently. It's not your fault, Alejandro. You were just a boy when this happened. The wail of sirens filled the air. The police had arrived. Javier seemed to deflate, all of his arrogance and power gone in an instant. Elena, he rasped, barely a whisper. My daughter, please, forgive me. Elena looked at him, years of pain, anger, and sadness reflected in her eyes. Forgiveness will have to wait, Father. Right now, it's time for you to face the consequences of your actions. As police officers entered the ballroom, creating a fresh wave of chaos, and as Javier was handcuffed and led away, Elena found herself surrounded by the family and friends she thought she had lost forever. Hugs, tears, and expressions of disbelief swirled around her in a chaotic vortex of emotion. Elena clung to Carlos's hand, her anchor amidst the storm. What happens now? She asked, her voice trembling. Carlos gave her a reassuring squeeze. Now, Elena, you start your new life, a life of freedom. As the police took statements and the wedding guests dispersed in a state of shock, Elena looked around, overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. 15 years of darkness had ended in a single, blinding flash of light. Alejandro approached again, his fiancée by his side, both with expressions of concern and wonder. Elena, he said softly, I know this isn't what you had planned, but would you like to stay? I think we have a lot to talk about. Elena looked at her brother, then at Carlos, and finally at the room full of familiar and unfamiliar faces. For the first time in 15 years, she had choices. She had a future. With a small smile, she nodded. I'd like that, Alejandro. I think we have a lot of catching up to do. And so, amidst the chaos and confusion, surrounded by the love of those she had lost and found again, Elena took her first tentative steps towards a new life. A life of freedom, of truth, and of infinite possibilities. The road to healing would be long and difficult, but Elena was ready to face it. Miss Valdez? A voice interrupted her thoughts. Elena turned to find herself face to face with a woman in a suit, holding a badge. I'm Detective Ramirez. Could I speak with you for a moment? Elena felt a surge of apprehension, but Carlos's reassuring hand on her back steadied her. Of course, Detective, she replied. They moved to a quieter corner of the ballroom, where the detective produced a small notepad. I know this is difficult, Ramirez began, her voice gentle but professional. But I need you to tell me everything you can about your captivity. Elena took a deep breath. Where do you want me to begin? At the beginning, the detective replied. The day you disappeared. Elena closed her eyes, memories flooding back like a dark wave. We were on a family vacation, or so I thought. Dad stopped the car in the middle of nowhere. He said he had a surprise for me. As Elena recounted her story, the ballroom around her remained in a state of controlled pandemonium. Alejandro approached Carlos, his face a mixture of gratitude and confusion. You helped her escape, didn't you? He asked in a hushed voice. Carlos nodded. I couldn't stand by and do nothing once I knew the truth. Alejandro extended his hand. Thank you for giving me back my sister. Carlos shook his hand, but his expression remained serious. Don't thank me. I only did what any decent person would have done. A heart-wrenching cry pierced the air. Everyone turned to see an older woman pushing through the crowd, her eyes fixed on Elena. My child, she cried, rushing towards her. My Elena! Elena turned, her eyes wide with recognition and shock. Mom? Sofia Valdez, who looked as though she had aged decades in 15 years, enveloped Elena in a fierce embrace, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm so sorry, she kept repeating. I should have known. I should have protected you. Overwhelmed, Elena could only hug her mother back, her own tears mingling with Sophia's. Detective Ramirez discreetly stepped aside, giving mother and daughter a moment of privacy. She approached Carlos, her expression serious. Mr. Mendez. Carlos Mendez. Carlos corrected. Mr. Mendez, I'm going to need your statement as well. I understand you were instrumental in Miss Valdez's escape. Carlos nodded. I'm ready to tell you everything I know, Detective. But first, what will happen to Javier Valdez? Ramirez frowned. Mr. Valdez is in custody. He's facing very serious charges: kidnapping, child abuse, fraud. The list goes on. And Elena? Carlos asked, his concern evident. What will happen to her now? The detective glanced towards where Elena stood, embraced by her mother, Alejandro now joining the family hug. That will depend largely on her, Ramirez replied. But I can assure you, we will do everything we can to ensure she receives the help and support she needs. Meanwhile, Elena finally pulled away from her mother's embrace, wiping away her tears. Mom, she said softly, how are you here? I thought you were in an institution? Sophia finished, a sad smile on her face. I was for a while. Javier, your father. He convinced me I was going crazy, that my suspicions about your disappearance were delusions. Alejandro took his mother's hand. But a year ago, Mom finally started getting better. She left the institution and she's been living with me ever since. Elena looked at her brother, a silent question in her eyes. Alejandro glanced down, shamefaced. I didn't know, Elena. I swear, if I'd had the slightest suspicion— It's okay, Elena interrupted, taking his hand. It wasn't your fault. You were just a child when this happened. Sophia caressed Elena's face, her eyes tracing every detail as if trying to memorize every line and curve. My child, you've grown so much. There's so much I've missed. We'll have time, Elena assured her, though her voice trembled slightly. We'll have all the time in the world to catch up. At that moment, Carlos approached the group, his expression serious. Elena, the police need to take your full statement, and there are reporters outside. The news has leaked. Elena felt panic rising in her chest. Reporters? No, I'm not ready for that. Alejandro stepped forward, his face determined. You don't have to face them now. I can make a statement on your behalf. Buy you some time. And I'll make sure no one bothers you, Carlos added, his tone protective. Elena looked around at the faces of her newly recovered family and at Carlos, the man who had risked everything to help her. For the first time in 15 years, she wasn't alone. Okay, she said finally, I'm ready to tell my story, but I need you all with me. Sophia took one of Elena's hands, Alejandro the other, and Carlos positioned himself protectively behind her. We're here, Sophia said, her voice firm for the first time. And we won't let you go again. As the group made their way towards where Detective Ramirez waited, Elena saw, out of the corner of her eye, Javier being led away in handcuffs. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Elena saw fear in her father's eyes, but also something else: regret, shame. She looked away. There would be time to deal with those feelings later. Right now, it was time to tell her story, to reclaim the life that had been stolen from her. Detective, Elena said as they reached Ramirez. I'm ready to make my statement. Ramirez nodded, producing her notepad. Whenever you're ready, Miss Valdez, take your time. Elena took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice shaky at first, but gaining strength with each word. My name is Elena Valdez. For 15 years, I was a prisoner in my own home. This is my story. As Elena spoke, the ballroom, which had been prepared for a wedding, became the stage for a story of survival, of resilience, and finally, of liberation. The night that was meant to celebrate a union had become the beginning of a much deeper and more meaningful reunion. Outside, camera flashes illuminated the night as reporters waited eagerly for a statement. But inside, surrounded by the love and support of her family and friends, Elena finally felt safe. The road to recovery would be long and difficult, fraught with legal, emotional, and psychological challenges. But for the first time in 15 years, Elena looked towards the future with hope. Her story, which had begun in the darkness of a basement, was now coming into the light. And with that light came the promise of a new beginning, of justice, and of a life that she could finally call her own.